Welcome to Trestle Times Talks, the voice of Franklin, New Hampshire. This is brought to you by the Franklin Communications Group, which is a nonpartisan, volunteer-powered network bringing local news and community stories to your ears. Subscribe to stay informed, share to keep your neighbors in the know, and if you've got news to share, the contact details are in the show notes. Now, here's what's happening in Franklin.
The Soldiers Memorial Hall was actually Franklin's first town hall. It was the first building dedicated to the purpose of town use, but also, and more importantly, for the Grand Army of the Republic's use. It started basically as an attempt to build a war monument to those who served in the Civil War.
Okay.
It was started by Stephen Kenrick by subscription. The goal was to gather enough subscriptions to amount to $1,000, which in today's money would have been, this was 1866, would have been about $20,000. Unfortunately, and all the paperwork still exists, it was actually found in Stephen Kenrick's safe after he passed away in the 1880s, which basically resurrected the idea once again, because that had failed, to create a monument to those who served in the Civil War.
Can we stop a minute?
Sure.
Let's talk about the Civil War. There was a lot of veterans from Franklin in the 1860s after the war ended in 1865. And a lot of them, like today, a veteran can go to the VFW, Veterans of Foreign War, American Legion. You've got the Wounded Warrior Project. At those times, the only project for the veterans was the GAR.
There were other veterans associations. In fact, if you ever go to the Weirs Beach,
Okay.
there are Victorian buildings, there are several of which still exist, that were regimental buildings.
So you're saying they had individual ones depending on what regiment?
There were individuals, but the GAR was a national organization.
Okay, so that was the first national organization for people.
I can't guarantee it's the first,
I
but
believe it is.
It might well be.
Because I don't think there was one for the Revolution.
Certainly one that was dedicated to the Civil War.
For the Civil War. And that became something that lasted a long time.
It lasted until, I don't know how you delicately say this, until its members died out.
Which
the GAR Hall, once it was constructed in Soldiers Memorial Hall, was used for a meeting space by the GAR until after World War I. Around the end of World War I, it was taken over.
For the folks out there, what's World War I?
What's World War I?
Yeah. And when was it?
It was the major conflict involving most of the nations in the world from 1914 to 1918.
So it was actually what's called the World War.
It was a world war.
So that's why it's WW1.
Right.
And wasn't it the war to end all wars?
It was supposed to have been, but it doesn't seem to have worked out quite that way. Even with the League of Nations, which was President Wilson's idea of keeping peace worldwide.
The League of Nations was what? The original idea of what it's now
the United Nations. Right.
Woodrow Wilson was president, and he championed that. And the way I understand it is, trying to make that happen, he got sick and barely able to finish his presidency because of the amount of effort he put into trying to make the League of Nations.
It was a lot of effort with unfortunately very little reason.
And the American, I don't even think we joined, did we?
I don't think we did. I think it was up to Congress, and I'm not sure
I don't think they ever passed that.
Yeah.
It just kind of fell apart.
Yep.
So let's get back. So we have all these veterans and their spouses.
Yeah. And they would meet until, like I said, the GAR was in existence roughly until WW1 and
1919 or
1919, 1920. And then the American Legion took over.
Okay,
and they used that space until 1984.
And American, I don't even think we joined, did we?
I don't think we did. I think it was up to Congress, and I'm not sure
I don't think they ever passed that.
Yeah.
It just kind of fell apart.
Yep.
So let's get back. So we have all these veterans and their spouses.
Yeah. And they would meet until, like I said, the GAR was in existence roughly until WW1 and
1919 or
1919, 1920. And then the American Legion took over.
Okay,
and they used that space until 1984.
And American Legion again is for war veterans.
Right.
It wasn't just if you served in the Army, you had to go to war.
Right. And they merged because of their dwindling numbers with the organization in Tilton. So the room was basically just used from that time on. It was used for city meetings. Various mayors used it for their office, their personal office. So going back to the original purpose, when they decided, there was a committee that was formed in 1892 to decide if creating a city hall or town hall was viable financially.
Shane Martin to the office, please.
We'll cut it
Shane, to
out.
the office, please.
It happens.
So they decided, and this is some paperwork that I want to credit. Albert G. Garnell this came from his archives and was courtesy of his son, Joey. This was a report on the
We'll
original
put it in
committee that, and it determined that the cost of the building would be $36,000. In construction costs, that would mean today it would be over $12 million.
And they didn't want to, they wanted to splurge and spend as much money as necessary.
Well, the $36,000 was incorporated in $30,000 of taxpayers' money, $3,000 more raised by additional tax, and then $3,200 that had been collected
For the memorial.
for the memorial. So that's why, right from the get-go, it was all about the Soldiers' Memorial. It was decided to be built, and it would a little over cost, but then again,
Why not?
nothing's changed.
That's
We
right.
still go
We
over
still
cost.
say that's what having a house is, isn't
But
it?
it became an icon in the
Yeah.
downtown Central Street area as a focal point for community events. It wasn't just for town and then city government. The Opera House, because it was originally designed to allow for the meeting of all those who wanted to attend the annual town meeting, it could accommodate them. But it was otherwise an empty space the rest of the year. So they wanted to be able to use it for entertainment, for trade shows, they had basketball games in there. They had
That's right.
wrestling in there. There's all kinds of things that were used in that space. But again, once again, if you look at the front facade, you'll see emblazoned Soldiers Memorial Hall, 1892. As time progressed, and unfortunately, World War I was not the war to end all wars.
That's correct.
There was, of course, an original plaque with all of those from Franklin who served in the Civil War. Underneath that was, they mentioned the Boxer Rebellion in China, which was an odd one. And then, of course, the Mexican-American War.
We don't have time to go into
No.
the Boxer War.
The second
in
one,
China.
the second plaque, World War I veterans. And the space, the Opera House space, was also utilized for, and you have a copy of the pamphlet, in 1919, a welcome to our heroes, to bring all the veterans who survived World War I. To an event that their service could be recognized.
Yes.
So the Opera House was utilized in many, many different ways.
Many performances of opera.
There were actually
musicals.
opera. There was actually opera.
there. They had dances. They even had a baseball game. World champion team in I forgot the exact date, 1910 or something. They had them in there from Philadelphia, I think it was.
Well, they may have been visiting. I don't think they played a
They
game.
played a game here.
Oh, yeah, on the field.
I believe.
Yeah.
It made it sound like reading that they did it inside,
Yeah.
but I couldn't make sense of it because at the time that was a pretty big place.
Well, it accommodated without, if you take away the offices that are inside the doors, inside the archway, you take away the clerk's office and the dentant office next to it. The space could accommodate in folding wooden chairs,
Yes,
fairly narrow,
yes,
over 800
yes.
with the balcony. So it was designed to accommodate a lot of people.
And
for
it
a lot
did
of reasons.
for a
And
long
they did.
time.
Graduations were held in there.
That's true.
In fact, the Historical Society has 2 real photo postcards, one taken towards the stage and one angle taken towards the back. It shows you the original configuration of the Opera House in 1908.
Yeah.
Also, an incredible chandelier, which I would really love to know what happened to that.
Well, In the middle of the.
in the middle of the ceiling. Yeah,
Well,
it was
when they
very
went-
ornate.
I guess it was when they started to be a little more austere, and they got rid of those and put in regular lights.
Yeah, those utilitarian ugly bulbs. Yeah. But that thing is, there's several things, and I'm digressing now, but there was a beautiful chiming clock in the corner of the Franklin Savings Bank. It was erected in 1924.
Oh, it's over there now, you mean?
No, it disappeared.
But it was originally in the.
It was originally there in 1924. A gorgeous clock that was right on the corner of the building.
Yeah, that was pretty important back in those days.
And I'd love to know what happened to that. But anyway, I don't
That's
think I'm ever
another
gonna find out.
story. Come on, back
Another
to
story.
topic.
So the GAR Hall today, in fact, there's a photograph I gave to Randy that was taken around 1950, is relatively in a pristine state from the way it was in 1893. The benches are still the same, the chairs are still the same, the lecterns are the same, the way the room is configured is the same, and it's one of the few pristine GAR halls that still exists in New England. So yes, we want to take care of it and preserve it.
Well, about that photo.
Yes,
I have to
back
look
to the
for that. So right now I don't have it to show you, but hopefully we'll have it when we get the podcast and post-production. We'll put all the pictures up.
And yeah, all the plaques, you have pictures of all the plaques on the exterior of the building, including one. Understand that in Franklin, there are other memorials to those who served. The World War II memorial is basically across the street from the high school.
Right.
There is a Korea veterans and Vietnam veterans
Right.
on either side, either end of the Webster Bridge.
Yeah.
The only thing on the outside of the building of the Soldiers Memorial Hall, which is a little out of place because it's for one soldier, and that is Jed Barker, who was
Jed Barker.
the only Medal of Honor winner
Oh,
from Franklin
In
who
which war?
served Vietnam.
in Vietnam of them.
Yeah.
That's
And
pretty hard to do.
his plaque is on the exterior of the building with all of the wording that went with the, and it was awarded posthumously, but it's
Hmm.
all the wording of the original medal ceremony. So, in fact, there is I think a display on the wall in the lobby to the same person.
You know, it's not only that, but our Soldiers Memorial Hall is one of 71,146 listings in the War Memorial Registry. That sounds like a big number, but when you look at all the millions of people been at war
Yeah.
and all of the different memorials you can find, including the Vietnam vet one in Washington, D.C., which is
This
the
is
last
all
one.
of those that is nationally, right? This
Yes.
is the national number.
That's
Yeah.
what it says, yeah, right
Yep,
there.
yep.
National Register. And that's a pretty significant thing. It makes this building much more significant than just being our city hall.
Right.
It represents thousands of lives from our area
Absolutely.
and was put up for very humble but also expressive reasons to honor those people that have passed away.
Those that used that hall, the GAR named itself the George Sweat Post because he was one from Franklin who made the
Okay.
ultimate sacrifice.
Uh-huh.
When the American Legion took it over, they were the Arthur Shaw Post
Okay.
because he was the first person from Franklin to be killed in action during World War I.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some of you, there's another war memorial to an individual in
Okay.
Franklin most people don't know about. And that's
What's
at the
that?
corner of West Bow and Central Street, right in front of the old Elks Club where the cannon is.
Yeah.
That is actually called Fenlison Square for the second person who died from injuries in
So
World
that
War I.
cannon is there for that reason?
Yeah, the cannon is not related to World War I. It is actually a
Oh,
World War II
yeah.
cannon, but it was placed there by the American Legion
In honor of this guy.
to bring attention to the fact that this honored one of those
So
Franklin's
is there a
own.
plaque with him on there?
There, it is on a post. Yes,
Can you see it from the road? I
you
don't think
can, but I wouldn't want to try to. I wouldn't suggest you try to read it as you
I
drive
don't think I've
past.
ever been able to see that, but I'll
Yeah,
have to
I actually
check it
some
though.
years ago it was repainted. It was just like a pewter color.
Okay.
With no differentiation of the letters, so it was very hard to read.
Hmm.
So some years ago, it was all painted black, and then the outline and the words were highlighted in gold.
Oh, gold.
Yeah, and in
Hmm.
fact, it's probably about time again to
Probably
redo
do
that.
that.
Yeah.
Well, that's a job for the Historical Society, isn't it? Leigh, are you volunteering? got it on record.
considering I did it the first time by myself, I guess I could do
You
it
might
again
do it
the
again.
second time.
Okay, well, that's pretty interesting. I hadn't heard of that before. So get back to where we were. The Soldiers Memorial Hall now, so it was expanded out to put in all the clerks. And so it went from 800 to what, 500 now or something?
I don't know if there's, because it's,
They took part of the back away too.
we have a little wider chairs. When the Opera House took, don't
That's
forget that in its evolution, initially as a town hall, there was a police department there in the corner office.
Right.
That had a spiral staircase going down to the jail cells, of which I think there are half a dozen that are still there.
Okay.
But the police department actually expanded over time until in the
We got in the 60s.
until the new building was built across the street, took up the entire basement
Well,
floor.
they also moved the pro for some of the other departments, right?
Which
What's
the Prue Center.
Prue
Yeah.
Center, yeah. I said
Well,
it.
there was, the welfare, planning and zoning was moved down there. In fact, planning and zoning was at one time up on the second floor
Right.
and had all their file cabinets in one corner of the GAR
The
hall.
GAR hall, yeah.
So when they moved to the Prue Center, they took all of that with them because there was plenty of room down there for their
The fire department
storage.
went over there on Bow Street, so they
Yep.
moved
So,
out. But we were bigger then. We
Well, in
haven't
this-
grown a lot. in our size, but-
I don't know. I'm trying to remember. I don't think I can remember the original or when we were at the height of industry in the late 19th century, what our population was. I want to say it was around 4,000, but I'd have to check.
I haven't found that exact number. I think it's closer to 6. But
It could have been.
by 19 to 1980, we didn't grow much.
No,
stayed
and
pretty
we haven't
much the
grown
same.
much in the last decade.
No, just 1,000 people.
Yeah.
Since- no, not
Not even that, I don't.
No, it was over 20 years. It was 1,000 people.
Yeah,
From
okay.
20 to 22, and we had only had a small percentage of growth. In fact, some years we declined, and we kind of pretty much stayed at between 8 and 9,000 for 20 or 30 years. It's not changed much, which is not good for such a beautiful town.
For
City, I should
so as we evolved, as we had more needs,
Right.
a police department was built across the way, as
Yeah.
well as the courthouse.
Right.
That allowed, because part of what is now considered the Opera House, the stage was actually a courtroom.
Okay.
So all of that moved across the street, and then that space was just left open.
They used it for storage. A lot of
Upstairs, yeah, in the balcony. In
And
fact, there
then-
was a drop-down ceiling on top of where
Yeah.
the balcony railings are now.
okay.
So most people going into that space never knew there was a balcony above it.
Yeah.
So all of that, once it became available again in the late
Well,
1990s.
but in the 1960s, 1990s, I believe it was used for voting.
Yes,
that-
yes, that
So-
space was still
So for
used
that
as a polling
30-year
place,
period,
right?
That's all they
And of
used
course,
for.
it was that the space, even when it was a courthouse, was used for city council meetings.
Okay, all right, so that's some, okay use. It doesn't add value to the property, anything, it just kind of,
The
lot of
value,
space.
the value to the property is really historic more than anything else, and it's hard to put a price on that. It
Right.
is. There are two. This is just my personal opinion. There are two outstanding icons, historic icons in the downtown
Okay.
Central. One is the trestle,
The bridge, yeah.
and the other is the Soldiers Memorial Hall.
Well, that's a different topic, railroads, we'll get into that
Yeah,
another time.
no.
but-
I just mentioned that as
No, you're right.
another
They
icon.
are important historically. They represent something. People travel all over the world to look at trestle bridges because they're so iconically strange to see a vast hollow and then this train going across with these wooden beams.
Okay, well, now you're talking about it, so I'm
Oh,
going
I'm
to add
sorry.
one other quick
All right,
note.
go ahead. Then we'll
That
get
was
back.
not the only trestle in Franklin.
That's
There
true.
was another trestle for the Bristol line of the Northern Railroad,
That's true.
which
That
in
got-
fact, there are photos of that people mistake for the existing trestle
Okay.
that still is there today. Because that was taken down
Long time
sometime,
ago.
a long time ago,
Yeah.
after 1936 flood.
Yeah,
The,
well,
the Bristol
it got
line was
destroyed.
done.
Yeah,
And
a
so
lot
it
happened.
could have been taken down anytime after that. But anyway,
So then we get into a little later, now that 30 years of being a voting place and storage and office usage, we get to about the 1990s.
in the 1990s, again, when the police department moved out, when the courts moved across the street,
Yeah,
It made that space available, and so a handful of citizens realized that they could bring that space back as an entertainment venue.
Which was.
So they with
Sorry.
volunteer labor, they took the drop-down ceiling away. They cleaned up the balcony. They restored the stage space and wings as best they could. And now, unfortunately, it's been closed to use because no matter what you think, if an old building, and this was 1893, over time is never going to adhere to modern codes because things continue to change.
Yeah, but
And
like
so
you
now
and me,
we're-
we're getting decrepit.
Who's getting decrepit? Not you or me?
I am.
Oh, well, okay, I am too.
And as you get older, you get a little more
Yeah,
decrepit.
but
have
you
to have
but you
some
make
fixes.
adjustments to accommodate
That's
for
right.
that.
I don't walk as fast.
Exactly. And I hold the handrail when I go up and down stairs.
All these little things. Well, you can't do it at a building, but you can at
No.
least
But
fix it up so that people
unfortunately,
feel good about it.
will always be liability with any public
Yes.
building.
And
The
you know,
idea is to try to minimize that as much as possible, which I understand is why the police chief
Right.
issued the hazardous
You have to.
hazardous
you
conditions.
got to get it there for everybody to get
Right.
into.
So
And you can't do that. with
It
the way
has
is.
been, and they have made changes over the years, but never to the point where you could say it was compliant with modern codes. So that's what we're up against right now.
So one of the things I find interesting is originally the whole history of New Hampshire, everybody that got a grant at any town in this state, they had to have a meeting house. And the meeting house represented more, it was for getting together to have dinner once in a while or to do something that they needed to do. And so everybody had those. And that was part of the deal starting back in the 1620s when we first settled this place. Along with that, then, that's where you'd have your moderator, have his meeting once a week. You have your selectmen when they had their meetings. But it's not all work. You have to have play.
Yeah.
And so a meeting house was designed for that. The other thing the meeting house was designed for could be used as a garrison when the Abenaki came running around and said hi. So many of those meeting houses ended up being either a garrison or a garrison before they became a meeting house. And so we don't have problems with that anymore, but
Well, as a matter of fact, the building in which the Historical Society is housed
Mhm.
is at Webster Place.
yeah,
The building was actually erected in 1795, but it had Indian shutters. Indian
Yeah.
shutters were a defensive measure that was put in colonial homes
correct.
so that they could defend against Indian
And have a
attack.
hole for their muskets to go through.
The funny thing about our building,
Yeah,
the Indian wars, the threat of Indian invasion
right.
was pretty much over by 1769. And the
Well,
building was
yeah,
built in
that's true.
1795. So in that case, the Indian shutters were basically light, heat, and
yeah,
cooling.
help you in the winter years.
Yeah.
Well, as a copy of yours over at the Daniel Webster birthplace, as was probably made by the same carpenter, since it's so similar. And they have, it turns out, I had a guy go through and look at it. They have Indian shutters believed in there too. They're covered up, but in the parlor and in the living room.
So they're back in the
Well, what the guy said is how wide it is. It
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
indicates that underneath is a Indian
Hmm.
shutter.
interesting.
So that's an aside. I'm sorry. You get two historians together, you're going to
Yeah. Okay.
go off topic a little bit, but it pertains to the value that things that have been around a while, including me,
Including us.
have a value, and we want to preserve those things.
Absolutely.
Now, I don't want to be preserved. I want to live my life fully, not as a preserved.
Well,
can of-
it
can of
depends on
Jell-O.
how many foodstuffs you eat with preservatives. You may already be.
I've been
being
already on that
preserved.
way. I've been at it long enough. So you got the GAR up there. It's a huge section. It's closed off. We don't have enough people or volunteers to let people tour it. It would be nice someday to be able to do that.
Well, we're working towards that.
Yeah, it would be a good goal. We have a very nice place to go into to deal with the clerks and different things, to have the city manager or the mayor. But you do have to go up some steps, or you have to, you can't get in. So some of our residents need help. And
Mhm.
so that has to accommodate that. Putting in an elevator so you can get up to every floor. makes a lot of sense. They did it at the library, which was built, 1919 or something?
The library was actually built in 1906, opened in
Sorry.
1907. It's a Carnegie Library, and hopefully people understand that.
And that is also a jewel,
It
something
is
very rare.
absolutely.
It's going to last. It can last hundreds of years the way those were constructed.
Mhm.
And if it wasn't for, well, that other topic, I won't get into that today. That's another thing about renewal, urban renewal.
Oh,
But
please.
we won't talk about that
No,
because that'll
let's
take
not.
too long. So in summary of all this, how would you like to summarize your thinking on the,
Well, as we progress in determining the level of renovations to make the Soldiers Memorial Hall accommodate health and life safety issues.
yeah, for
to
everybody?
make sure that the fire chief is happy with the changes. We will continue to move forward in that regard and trying to keep the cost down as much as possible,
Absolutely.
but also understanding that it is an icon, the building itself and the GAR hall inside.
And also the stage and all of that.
Of course.
So you
but
got three sections,
It all is part of Franklin's history
right?
and should be appropriately preserved.
Because we have a very unique history here. We don't have time for that either. We'll get to that story. When you try to figure out the history of Franklin, it's very convoluted and goes back 150 to 200 years before you can really figure out how it ended up the way it did. But that's another time.
That's another day.
Well, Leigh, I'm glad you came by. I want to thank you,
You're welcome.
and you have a good day.
You too.
And for Frank and for Trestle Times, we want to say thank you for viewing our podcast now, and have a good day.
Thanks for tuning in to the Trestle Times Talks from the Franklin Communications Group. Like, subscribe, and share to support local voices. And if there's news we should cover, our contact info is in the notes. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay Franklin strong.